Hi everyone, so I wanted to show you a miniature I made recently, and first thing I did was I took this chair. This was left over from a different model that I did a long time ago, and I reupholstered it with this pink ginghamy type fabric. To make the cushions for it, all you do is you cut out a rectangle piece of fabric and fold it in half, and you stick two of the sides down and leave one side open. And once you've done that, you then stuff the inside with the polyester wadding stuff that you can use. It's the same stuff you use for like normal sized cushions and things. It's a bit fiddly at first, but once it starts going into the into position, it's easy enough then, and it's just a case of poking it down far enough to make sure that the wadding is out of the way of the seam for when you actually glue the edge down. A little tip as well: use tweezers to press the edges down if your hot glue gun's like warmed up and it's quite hot, just to save your fingers. Then I did have a bit of trouble with this one. It kept popping open, but I did stick it down a couple of times. It stayed eventually. Then for the back cushion, I just made a long rectangular piece of fabric, and then folded that in half, glued the two sides together, and then put the padding in, and then glued it together. And then I had to trim off a little end of it just to make it fit properly, but once it fitted properly, that was the chair made. It's not perfect, as you can see. There's a bit of missing fabric and stuff, but I'll cover that later on. You'll see how. Then I've got this box frame, and it's a really deep one. I've had it for ages. It's a really old one, and I spray painted it black. And the way I did that, because the glass is actually fixed in place on this one, so what I did is I covered the whole thing, all the glass, in masking tape and then sprayed it. And that worked out quite well, to be fair. I didn't spray the bottom side, obviously, because that's the side it was standing on when I sprayed it. But I painted that with acrylic paint. It was fine. And then dried that off with the heat gun later on. First thing I did was took some... This is some paper left over from when I did Winnie's Cottage. It's like a fake stone floor stuff that I got out the model making section at the art and crafts store, and I cut it to the right size. It took a bit of trimming, a couple of goes, and then I just pressed down over the edges so I could see where the edge was, and then used that to cut the correct depth of material. Well, paper, I should say. And to stick that in place, I used double-sided tape. The reason I like to use the double-sided tape is because A, I can move it around if I want to and reposition it, and B, it sticks down a lot flatter. If you use hot glue, you'll end up with these like funny lumps and bumps in the flooring, which looks weird. So to get this to stick down nice and flat, I use double-sided tape. And then all you do is press it down to smooth it down. Now, I did stick it slightly in the wrong position, and the thing I like about using the double-sided tape is I can reposition it. And then it's just a case of smoothing it down. And then the edge that folds over the end of the frame, I just hot glued that in place just to make sure it would stay well stuck down, so it wouldn't interfere with the back of the frame. Because obviously if I'm taking the back of the frame on and off, if I'm adjusting things, obviously I didn't want that getting in the way. So that's the basic sort of room, as you can see. Then it's a case of adding effects and more furniture and that sort of thing. So first thing I did was took a bit of black paint, and I dry brushed around the corners and the edges with that, because I wanted to make the floor look like it was a bit grimy, old, unclean, unlooked after. because obviously I want this to look like it's quite an old room and it's well worn and a bit tatty. So, and also painted the base of the table as well. To make the actual pedestal of the table, I just took a stick of hot glue and actually chopped a bit off just to make that pedestal, because I couldn't find anything the right size, unfortunately. So that's what I used in the end. But it worked out quite well. It just took 2 layers of paint just to cover the hot glue base. Then I took this like magenta colour and dry brushed that on the walls over the top of the black. I wanted it to look like, you know, a long time ago this room used to be like a really nice colour. It was like really nice in the past, but now it's just all like gungy and not very well looked after. So I dry brushed this magenta colour over the top because I wanted it to look like faded paint kind of. I could have done that first and then put the black over later, or something like a wash of black over later on, but I like doing it where I put the black on first and then dry brush different colours over the top. I like how that effect works. I also went over the corners with a bit of a darker black just to make sure that the corners look really grimy and dingy. I also dry brushed around the edges of the glass as well, because I wanted it to look like this has been in the frame for a long time. So I dry brushed some grime using black paint around the edges of the glass as well. I like how it sort of makes the edges look a bit misty and murky and a bit grimy on the glass. And then touched up any bits that were supposed to be jet black that I'd missed. Obviously when you're spray painting you're not going to be able to get every single little nook and cranny. So I just touched up any areas I'd missed. And then the next job was to paint the bottom of the frame, which was left because obviously when I spray painted it, this was the side it was standing on. And it's easy enough. I mean, it's just a quick wash of a very thin down black acrylic paint just to make it match the rest was fine. And then I actually used my heat gun to dry this off so I could actually carry on working and making the room, because I wanted to get this done in a day. Small projects like this I like to finish in the same day if possible. And this hot glue, this heat gun, it's just a bog standard heat gun from the local craft store. Normally used in like card making when you get the gilding powder and stuff. That's what I normally use it for. But I find it dries out acrylic paint really well, especially when it's only a thin layer. Then the next thing after that is to start arranging the room and working on what I need to put together for the back wall. So first things first, I wanted to arrange the furniture. So the armchair, I've got the armchair that I made, like put together and reupholstered, and I've got the little coffee table that I made. Then the little mini bookcase that I had is left over from another kit. I used a library kit to make Winnie's library in Winnie's cottage, but obviously I didn't need as many bookshelves as it had got. It was just a miniatures kit I'd got online to make like a library, and got loads of bookcases in it and shelves. And then this little cupboard was from another kit. So it's basically little bits left over from kits that I've put together and painted black. the bowl of fruit on top of the cupboard on the right, it's actually just like a bowl-shaped bead thing with 3 red beads inside to make it look like fruit, in case you're wondering how I did the bowl of fruit. And it's just a case of putting a little bit of hot glue on the bottom of them just to hold them into position, just to keep them where I want them inside the frame. So obviously in case the frame gets knocked, I didn't want stuff moving and falling around. And then I got this tiny little ceramic mug, which is from a dollhouse set. It was like a dining set where it's like plates and pots and pans and mugs and stuff. And managed to find that in a drawer amazingly. And it's just the right size for this model. And so I put that on the table. And also the little book is left over from when I did Winnie's library, and it's just a rectangular piece of balsa wood, very small, wrapped with a printed book cover and then glued in position. And they're dead easy to make, those tiny little books. I did make a bunch of those when I did the library for Winnie's Cottage. I'll link the video below if I can find where the video is. You know, if you wanted to know how I made the bookshelves and how I put the books together. Then these 2 frames I actually got from like the local craft store, and they were like £1 for the pack of 2. And normally you use these in card making or something, and they're very small and made out of plaster, and they are white, and the one is really well detailed, like really intricate. So what I did was paint them black and then use a baby wipe to wipe off the wet paint off the top of the surface, and then that give it that sort of antique-y, grungy, dingy look. The fake plant is just some fake foliage out of another miniatures kit from ages ago. And I just glued those into the vase. And the vase is actually made out of a glass from a Bratz kit. It was from one of the tour buses, and there was like a kit, like a little set with it, which was like a little smoothing machine and some glasses, like fake wine glasses. And I used one of those, and what I did is I just painted it black and then put like a wash of grey over it to create that vase. Because it was all discoloured and stuff, so I couldn't keep it with my Bratz stuff, so I just decided to recycle it in my craft box. Then I used some hot glue to make little cobwebs, and what I do is you just get a tiny bit of glue on the end of the glue gun, dab it onto the frame, and then quickly move the glue gun backwards and forwards between the frame and the back wall, and you get these little streaks of glue. And I did that in different places all over to create little cobwebs, because I want this room to look like it was used once and all of a sudden it was just left abandoned and it's been empty for years afterwards. And like, it's getting dingy, it's just starting to go a bit mouldy, and it's full of cobwebs and that sort of thing. That's what I want it to look like. Then I decided what to put in the frames, because originally I'd put pictures in the frames and changed my mind and painted them black. This is like a vintage, this is like stuff for card making that I've got a pack of. And it was like a vintage looking fairy. So I just cut out the piece of it big enough so it would fit in the frame, and then just dry brush black around the edges to make it fit in with the frame and look like it was like aged and as grotty as the frame. Then this picture is from an old medical textbook, and it got this little picture of a skeleton in it. And all I've done is painted the background and then put this like textured medium stuff over it out of my craft box. Then stuck it into place and then dry brushed over the top of it to make it fit in with the frame and look dingy and dull and old. I could have put like Perspex fake glass in these frames if I really wanted to, but it's hard to see the pictures underneath when you've got like the glass in place, so I decided not to put any glass in the frames. And then I just moved that bush around just to make sure I could see that skeleton's the skull. Then I took a lollipop stick and cut the ends off and cut it to make a shelf. I decided it needed something else because there was a lot of blank space on the wall, and I just cut it to the right size and just levelled it off because I'd cut it a bit wonky. And then it's a case of just gluing that in position and painting it. I could paint it before gluing it in, but I find it's easier to glue it first and then paint it. I find it too fiddly trying to hold something that small and paint it, get all the sides covered that I want to cover. So I just stuck it in place and then painted it black to match the background. I also dry brushed a bit of grey over the top just to make it stand out from the wall a little bit. I didn't want it to blend in with the wall. So as you can see, I just dry brushed a bit. It just makes that shelf stand out from the wall just that little bit. And then it was a case of figuring out what I was going to stick on there. Now I had decided I wanted a fake black obsidian crystal ball, and I found a bead that would work, and I found these little fastening things. These are like little things that you'd use in making bracelets, and I just glued one of those upside down onto the shelf to create the base, and then glued the bead over the top. This is a black glass bead, but I like it because it passes for a little black crystal ball. Then I wanted to look for something else to stick on the shelf, so I had to think, and then I found a little oval shaped frame and a little picture of a butterfly. So I stuck obviously the frame on the butterfly and then painted the frame black so it would match everything else. And I kind of wanted it to look like there's either they've got a butterfly, like a dead butterfly inside there, or they've got a photograph of a butterfly or something. I wanted it to just look like there's a butterfly in that frame, basically. And then I dry brushed a bit of grey over the top as well. I wanted the frame to look like it's a bit dingy, it's starting to rot, it's starting to go a bit funny. And I also dry brushed the picture inside as well to make it look a bit dingy and a bit grimy. I wanted all the stuff to look like it's been in here for a long time. And then obviously to paint around the edges of the frame would be awkward, so I glued it in position first. That meant then it was held nice and steady so I could paint around the edges of the frame. Otherwise it's awkward, like I said, trying to hold something this small and trying to paint all the edges and not miss a spot. And then once it was glued in place, I just started touching up around the edges of the frame with the black. I did have to put a bit more glue in the top just to hold that down. But once that was glued, it was nice and secure. And then just touch up any little areas of missing paint. Like so. And then I've created some more little fake cobwebs with my glue gun. Wanted it to look like there's plenty of cobwebs between the frame and the shelf. Again, to make it look like it's been there a long time. So here I'm just running tiny little strands of hot glue from the frame to the shelf. And then I was like, there's a little space, I could fit one more thing in. And then fortunately I remembered I've got a miniature perfume bottle in my bag, which I'd found. It was obviously originally in my doll's house, I think, and it fell out, but it's just the right size to look like some sort of potion bottle. So I decided to use that for this project, and so I had to have a little bit of a dig around in my bag to find it because it was in like a little side pocket. Because it's one of them where like I've picked it up when I've seen it randomly and just dumped it in my bag. And then I used a little bit of hot glue and stuck it in position on the shelf. I had to use my tweezers for this one because it's a bit fiddly, but as you can see, it's quite a nice looking little perfume bottle. and I just stuck that in position, and then I used the little bit of black that was still on my brush just to make the top of it look a bit more dingy. I didn't want it to look like a brand new, nice and clean perfume bottle. And then just checked that it fit the back, and then it was a case of dingying up the inside. I wanted to make everything, like I said, look like it's been sort of used and then just left randomly because the person who's used it has disappeared for some reason. So I had to make the cup look dirty with a bit of black dry brushing. I had to make the tablecloth look dirty, make the armchair look a bit dirty. Unfortunately you can't see that on camera at this point, but you'll see I do move it in a little bit so you can see what I'm doing. It was just in order to reach the area I needed to paint, I needed to twist it around in that position. Then I used my glue gun to create some cobwebs on the armchair. They're only fine, but if you look at them, you can see them more in real life than you can on camera, but you can just about make them out here, hopefully. And I did some cobwebs going from the cup to the table as well. And a little bit on the book on the table. And then once I'd finished making the inside look dingy, it was a case of adding the lights. I've got these micro LEDs which I sort of wrapped around in an oval shape and stuck them to the ceiling with a bit of the hot glue. And then put the back in place and folded down the little clips that hold the back on. And I found that gave me plenty of room at the top for the wire to come through without it pinching or anything. And then it was a case of positioning the battery pack on the back and just gluing it in position so it would stay nice and secure. So I glued down the wire first and then just put a little bit of glue on the battery pack. Make sure you stick it on the back of the battery pack and not the front. You need to be able to open it if you have to replace the batteries. And once all that was done, that was it. I also added a little bit of fake moss in there, which I stuck in random places and also sprinkled a bit on the floor as well. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.